by Gwen Taylor, my partner in crime, co-host. Bottom B, I love you, Gwen. Thank you so much. I was just saying, like, I could only do this because Gwen and I can just talk if we can't get guests. But Liz was super easy to schedule with, which I really appreciate because she's a very in-demand lady. So I'm just going to give like your bio. Elizabeth Nolan Brown, award-winning journalist, senior editor at Reason magazine, author of Reason's biweekly Sex and Tech newsletter. So that gives you a hint of what we're going to be talking about. Co-founded Feminists for Liberty with Kat Marti, and teaches journalism at the University of Cincinnati. And our little backstory is we both worked at Reason, and I remembered us overlapping, but your bio says 2014, so that can't be.
I think we just missed each other.
Yeah.
But that does create, that Venn diagram of friends and colleagues, right? That then makes it feel like you knew each other.
We did know each other a little bit in DC, yeah.
Yeah.
For like a year or so.
The Liberty movement.
Yeah.
I left in 2017, early 2017.
Oh, wow. So yeah, a few years. Cathy was starting Feminists for Liberty with me and Kat before she moved to the West Coast. So
I was in the early meetings.
Yeah.
And I attended the book club for a while and bought the zine. I'm an avid supporter.
Yeah. Back in the early days, we had high hopes for the Liberty movement.
Yeah. But we're still fighting for liberty in our own ways. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight, Liz.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, Emma, anything that you would want to add that folks should know about you before we get started?
No, that sums it up.
That sounds great. So I had read your article, the One Taste trial, feds can't find a clitoris or evidence of forced labor, a while ago. And I started to reread it and the update, but then I was like, I think it'd actually be better for me to come fresher so that people who haven't read anything about this and don't know what it is can understand what's going on. Because from what you've written, I think it's a really interesting case. And even after having read it, I have lots of questions. So, and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. And, people tuning in, please ask questions and give commentary. And we can take them as they come or at the end, whatever seems to make the most sense. But yeah, just to get us started, like, what is One Taste?
Yeah, and this is, I was excited when you asked me to talk about this because this is like my favorite thing to talk about right now.
Oh, good.
So One Taste is a group. It was founded in San Francisco in like 2004. It's a wellness company. They've done all sorts of things over the years. Like they taught yoga and they gave massage at this like sort of wellness studio they had, and they made like macrobiotic and vegan food. But the main thing that they are known for is orgasmic meditation, which is this sort of this practice of clitoral stroking where it's often done in a group. It's like a very like contained thing. It's like 15 minutes. There's like, they set a timer. There's a very specific way they're supposed to do it. And it can be men or women, but always the woman is the one being stroked, obviously. And it's sort of, it's supposed to do a lot of things. They've much later done some studies on it about how it can help with sort of, with sexual trauma and with just like positive affect and like increasing mood and all sorts of things like that, as you might imagine. And so they kind of came to prominence, teaching orgasmic meditation, ended up sort of branching out of San Francisco, having an office in New York City, having offices all over the country, became really, really popular for a while. Like if you look at like media from like 2011 to 13, they were covered in like every lifestyle, section of every newspaper and every publication ever. Just, the founder, Nicole Didone, wrote a book and everything like that. So really sort of, rode that sort of wave of like sex positivity of that sort of the, aughts and like early 2010s. And then in 2018, there was this article.
I feel like
kind of going on.
No. I appreciate that. I just wanted to, so it's not like in my head and I'm not fully listening. I remember when I was in San Francisco, I was walking down the street and saw One Taste orgasmic meditation. And I was like, that sounds great. Like, let's go in. Let's check it out, because it looked like a store
Did
or
you?
whatever. I did. I did not go in because my friend was like, no, don't go in there. That's a cult. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. I didn't really believe them. And then I read a really long story, and it definitely seemed like a high pressure, if not high control situation. Was kind of the accusation, as far as and this was years ago that I read the story, that I could remember. But it just, I don't know, the whole thing, like it went into detail about the stroking, and it reminds me of like what I think of a lot of like rope and BDSM, which is just like anything to get 15 minutes focused on sexual pleasure. That's not somebody trying to put something inside you. Like, I feel like that's kind of like the market for a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
There's like an unmet market demand for that these things are trying to fill.
Yeah, I
Pun
remember because I
unintended.
worked for women's health and like lifestyle blogs like in the early 2010s, and like I remember reading about it a lot,
Positive
and probably
coverage.
some positive coverage at the time, like, or at least like not negative. Like it was usually
Right.
sort of like, whoa, I went and tried this, 15-minute orgasmic
Right.
stroking technique in a room full of people, and it was crazy. Sort of like it was usually like the novelty of it was the focus, but
That makes sense.
yeah,
And it was also the era of like the personal essay, where it would be like
yeah,
totally normal to write about your own experience,
yeah.
In
as
a room
opposed to like
with other people? I'm sorry.
the Bay is a wild place.
Kathy brings me on, I think, partly because I'm so easily soft, and so that it's just a good.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've got to say, like, one of my friends who I think of as probably my most, like, one of my more sexually adventurous friends, like, they were part of like a burlesque troupe, and they did a lot of like cake sitting fetish stuff and like all sorts of stuff. And they heard about what they told me that they had heard about what they back they too, and they were like, wait, like a room full of people? It's like, nope, not for me. And I was like, wow, they lost them. Then that's sort of,
With the
yeah.
cake sitting burlesque performer says no thank you. That's intense.
Yeah. And I
Okay.
don't think I would have been into it too, but I don't know if I wouldn't have been into it because of or I mean, like, I feel like I would have actually liked maybe the orgasmic meditation element. I think what would have turned me off probably is what you said, which is it was a very tight knit group. And I don't want to say that it was a cult at all. Like, actually, I'm saying
Right.
it was not a cult. I'm saying it was not, a lot of the negative coverage has been overblown. But it definitely was a group where it was like you were expected if you were like part of this. Like they also had like communal
You couldn't just
housing.
stroke and leave.
Right, but you could actually, you could if
Okay.
that's all you wanted to do. Like if you just wanted to like take a class and like do that, you could totally do that. But a lot of people got really into it, and if you wanted to be like part of their coaching program, or if you wanted to like live in their communal housing or things like that, then it was a commitment. Like you had to be like very much like it was, because it wasn't just about the like orgasm or the meditation stuff. It was also about like open communication and like, living your truth and like self-empowerment and things. So there was just like a lot of communication involved with these people. And I'm like, I could not have done all that communication, but
For me, the blocker would be money, because I was
yes.
part of a sex cult in San Francisco and loved it, but it was very low cost to participate. And so I could afford that one.
They weren't
But
upselling you all the time.
no, it was like, it cost like $50 a month to go to the orgy. And like, that was plenty. That was
Well,
all I could afford.
so all I read was the press release from the Department of Justice. So I have a very, like straight conviction kind of thing when I read it. And I got a lot of Synanon notes.
Synanon? Oh,
Synanon,
the,
the cult, the anti-drug cult from the 60s. And I actually have a friend two friends whose parents were in it. And so that's what I got. The forced labor, that is kind of a way to make money for the organization. So that's what kind of was going through my head when I was reading it. Aside from the other stuff.
the flavor of the labor.
Yeah. So I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
that's been my big thing with the coverage, is that like whatever you think of the group, and on its mission, its practices, whatever, like whatever you think of the group, like personally, the prosecution has been way overreach. Like it's ridiculous the charges that they brought against them, like the way that they've prosecuted.
Let's get you back in the story, if you
Yeah.
would. So they're chugging along. They're getting positive to like medium affect coverage, and then what happens?
Then there was like a negative article that came out in 2018 from Bloomberg News. And it was kind of, if you read back again, like it's really vague in its allegations, right? But it's like written really salaciously, so that if you weren't like really reading carefully, it would look really, really bad. It was like someone said like, oh, I was like pressured to get married by them, and then I did, and then like someone else was like, well, like I was pressured to have sex with like people so that they would pay for classes, and there was just all this stuff. And like later, the guy that said that that he was pressured to like have sex with people so they had classes, like walked it back like in later like media and stuff. But like this, it was like full of really salacious allegations, trying to make them seem like a cult, trying to make them seem like, yeah, they were engaged in sort of sexual coercion and things like that. And from there, like there started to be more and more negative coverage. Most of it just sort of rehashing the Bloomberg stuff. But then, a couple years later, there was a podcast. A couple years later, there was a Netflix documentary. And again, there's like problems with all this media. Like the Netflix documentary was the like, it started off really like positive stuff about it, and then it got negative at the end. It was produced by Lena Dunham. I don't know why I felt in to say that, but so this was like a big deal documentary. And like at the end, it got really negative about them. And what it did was have this woman who was like, I'm reading these journals that were, written by my sister right after she left one case. And they said all this stuff about how she felt like pressured and coerced and to do all this stuff. And it was just like a really negative environment. And this woman, she had left the company, and then she had threatened to sue them, and they had settled it out of court. And she had a non-disclosure agreement, so she wasn't allowed to talk about it, right? So conveniently, her sister just happened to, without her knowledge, find these hard copy journals that she had written in 2015, right during her time with One Days, and left in her sister's garage. And then her sister typed them into a Google Doc with Netflix, and Netflix and her sister were both active editing the thing. So like, that's a little sus. And this has been a big point in later in the federal trial. And sorry, I'm just kind of jumping, but I want to get into this too, because this was a big deal in the Netflix case. And this is what made kind of one of the things, again, that made this was the start. This woman became the star witness in the federal case. Well, they hired, like, they were like, we need to see like this Google document. So they hired a forensic expert, and finally, like after years and years, they got access. The people with One Taste got access to the Google document, and they saw that there had been like 55 major revisions of the thing, and that like the person from the Netflix producer had been in it, this girl who left had been in it, her sister had been in it. There'd been all these edits, and they finally were like, we want to see a hard copy of the journal. They finally got a hard copy of the journal. The hard copy of the journal matched the final draft of the 55 drafts, which doesn't make any sense. If her sister had literally just like typed up her journals, why would it match the final draft? Finally, in like April of this year, like right before they were about to go to trial, right when this woman, her name's Aries Blank, had been the star witness all along, she admitted, and she'd been in like dozens of FBI interviews saying that, no, this was authentic, whatever. She admitted that she had actually just like her and her sister had fabricated the journals so that she could give them Netflix, and so that she would be able to have her voice in the Netflix documentary without breaking her non-disclosure agreement. So I only bring all that up because like that's, like this was a big part of the government's case. And a lot of the things in the government's case against them, it sort of seems like it was based on salacious media reports. And the Justice Department was like, yes, like we're going to go after this. And then when the reality ended up not conforming to the salacious media, the Department of Justice was just kind of like, we're already doing this, so like we're going to keep going with it. And even if our case isn't really there, they really started investigating him for alleged sex trafficking, for forced labor, for all of these things. That was what they were like investigating to begin with. They ultimately charged the founder, Nicole Dedone, and Rachel Sherwitz, who was a former VP of sales. They ultimately charged them with conspiracy to commit forced labor, but no underlying forced labor charge. They just say that they conspired to forced labor for like 14 years, but never actually like did it. Which is kind of like unprecedented for the Department of Justice to bring a forced labor case that doesn't have any underlying, no abduction, no sexual assault, no money laundering, nothing underlying it. Literally just conspiracy to commit forced labor.
So why did the Justice Department want to go after these people at all? I mean, there's lots more dangerous groups of people, lots more forced labor, lots more, sex trafficking people than this. Why them?
Yeah, so my theory is that, like, again, like, they started the investigation in 2018, the FBI did, when this Bloomberg piece came out. And this was, like, hot off of the Nexium, Nexium,
Yeah.
the sort of, New York-based self-help group, but that actually ended up having a guy who was at its head that was, like, quite abusive, it seems, and also had this sort of secretive women's group that was, like, actually blackmailing people and stuff like that. So that was, like, a slam dunk for the feds. And this was in the middle of, if you remember, of like, this was like the height of the Me Too movement. So they got a lot of positive press, the FBI and the Department of Justice, for taking down Nexium. And also, there was just like all this pressure to sort of go after these sorts of cases. So I feel like they heard about this one and were like, yes, this will be another slam dunk sex cult case. And so they started it. I mean, I talked to several women who were like very intimately involved with One Taste, who were either living in the communal housing or worked for them or all of the above. And they had FBI agents like show up at their door or call them on the phone repeatedly and be like, I want to talk to you about being a victim in this case. And they were like, I don't think I'm a victim. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't consider myself a victim of One Taste. And they were like, well, let me put you in touch with the victim specialist. Like, if you testify in the case, then you can do a civil lawsuit and they'll give you money. Like, they really put the hearts on them. And like, there's at
Yeah.
least 4 women who say that they felt really pressured by the FBI to become victims, even when they repeatedly said, I'm not a victim. So it really seems like there was this sort of agenda from the beginning to like, to make this into a sort of case that could be a slam dunk, a sort of like Me Too case for the DOJ.
And it sounds crazy to say like, oh, they're going to put people's lives, in danger or start whole investigations just for what they think is going to impact their media coverage. But I remember with the Waco
Yeah.
raid that David Koresh walked, was it a mile to his mailbox every day at around the same time? Like they could have arrested him with zero
Mhm.
violence and putting no one in danger. They knew when he was gonna. He knew that day he was gonna walk. They chose to do a raid because they expected, the ATF expected it to get positive media coverage, and a
Well,
bunch of
that's
people
like,
died.
yeah, in this case, Rachel Sherwitz, one of the defendants, like she was one of the, I guess, so this was like the 5th woman who was like, I'm not a victim. And the FBI interviewed her 3 times before they arrested her. And initially were like considering her a victim in the case. And when she kept insisting she wasn't a victim, then they had like SWAT teams descend on her apartment in New York. And again, they knew, like they'd interviewed her at her apartment multiple times. Like it wasn't like they thought there was no reason to think she was the danger or anything. And all of a sudden they
Right,
had
she
like
didn't
the
have a
whole like,
cache of weapons and she's gonna go
yeah,
out in a blaze
exactly.
or something. No, but see, I think that my feeling is having covered as a former journalist, having covered lots of court cases. And then also as someone who interacts with people who are involved with the federal government, it seems to me that these types of people they draw a line in the sand and rolling it back and saying, oh, we were wrong. They just don't know how to do that. It's like, okay, we've said this is it. So now we're going to figure out. And that, obviously our prisons are filled with wrongfully convicted people and the whole thing, because once someone draws a line in the sand, a DA, a federal prosecutor, whatever, they're not rolling it back. They can't admit it's a personality defect or something, or it's a
No,
system defect.
I think that's exactly it. Because I think, yeah, like I think when you talk about the initial reasons, it's because they thought they had the slam dunk case. But yeah, once they realized not, like, why couldn't they just be like, never mind? Like, but exactly what you said. Like, they had already put out some press releases. They had already had FBI agents,
Uh-huh.
including the main FBI agent who was on this case, who there's a lot of like iffy stuff that he did as part of it. He was also the lead FBI agent on the Nexium case. So this was like, he was kind of like, this is my thing,
Yep.
and then when it doesn't conform to their narrative, it was like, okay, we are going to make this conform to our narrative rather than like, maybe we'll just back off and let this one go.
I think that's absolutely true, and it's been really interesting seeing true crime as a genre like come into my life and consuming a decent amount of it, and time after time I feel like the cops never talk to the audio only ones, but I'll see the documentary ones, and the cops will be on there and they'll be like, here is incontrovertible proof that you've done fucked up.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, what would you do differently? And the answer is very obvious what they should have done differently. And every time the cop will be like, nothing. I did
Yeah.
it perfectly.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Well, and on the cases of escalation, Ruby Ridge is another example of escalation that is similar to the Waco.
yeah.
They've taken a situation and they created the escalation that ended up killing people. And, it.
But I feel like they also know who to pick on, because it's like, well, they started an investigation against Matt Gaetz, and they didn't feel the need to bring that to a trial or to some kind of conclusion. So,
Speaking of Matt Gaetz, so Matt Gaetz has been sticking up for One Taste, and so has Roger Stone, and so have a whole bunch of right wingers, and it's so crazy because could you like imagine if you told like anyone like 10 years ago like, oh, like it's only conservatives who are going to defend this orgasmic meditation group?
no.
But like
No.
the people at One Taste have been trying to just, to get people to cover them across the board. And like no one has been interested, aside from me and conservatives mostly, has been interested in sort of like digging deeper into the story behind the sex cult thing.
Can you
And
explain why that is?
because they've so one of the main witnesses of the trial was like a guy who was like coached or did therapy with some of the witnesses, the FBI victim witnesses, and like sort of convinced them that they were actually like victims and that they were that this was like cult behavior. And he also wrote a book saying that Trump supporters are in a cult. So that was, I think, one of the things. And so they sort of like started framing it a little bit to the people, like to right-wing media, like, hey, like this is the same corrupt sort of FBI who's, done this stuff that you don't like with the Trump administration. And like, look at, they're using this like anti-Trump person as their main guy. And then also there's a religious freedom angle, because ultimately like so much of the evidence in the indictment and then later at trial was like, One Taste and its leaders taught these beliefs, like this belief that like sexual openness and having multiple sexual partners and promiscuity was good and could reach enlightenment. They taught these beliefs, and then people were saying like the way that they forced them was by convincing them that this was a good idea, and that was like like unrefutable pressure, because then once they had these ideas in their head, they couldn't resist and they had to like have sex, is what their argument was. And like we can get more into the argument because that's actually the crazy part. But like, so they the people that are the One Taste people made the point that like this is a religious freedom issue. Like if you're saying like just teaching ideas, and then if people act on that ideas in ways that they later regret can be a form of forced labor, like that has huge implications for all sorts of ideologies and all sorts of spiritual groups and things like that.
How about Mormon tithing? 'Cause,
Kathy's
that's
face right
a
now, I
lot
want to know
of
what you're
money.
thinking.
That is so, that is not where I thought you would go. It makes a strange kind of perfect sense. And it's like,
Yeah.
so real. I mean, if this is consistent, then the evangelical Christian apparatus is going down, because they are absolutely teaching things that do
Compel
impact
behavior.
people's sexual choices, their labor choices, ironically in ways that are very clearly and in measured, documented ways associated with actual sexual abuse and exploitation. Yeah, if you're going after those people, I could see why they would be afraid. How fascinating. I guess where I thought it was going to go was, I don't know, I feel like there's a little bit of the right kind of claiming sex, like the busty milkmaid dresses and the National Review saying like what happened to hooking up in the back of seat of a car, the natalism. Now they're doing away with helping people low income women obtain birth control and giving them access to fertility treatments through Title IX. Meanwhile, I feel like there's this idea that like the left is so libertine and so sex positive, but like that's not really true at all.
That's the flip side of this, is like it's not like the Fuentes defendants or the people that are supporting them, it's not like they wanted only right-wing media to support them, but like
No.
they just were unable to get, as far as I know, unable to get any traction amongst like more liberal media, left-oriented media, like because, and it's just so crazy, but it's like, I mean, yeah, again, like you can imagine a time, I don't know when the time would have been, like 15 years ago, in the 90s, whenever, where like definitely there would have been a lot of feminists coming to the defense of these women who like consider themselves feminists, whose whole like reason they say for founding this company is like women's empowerment. Like it's a very feminist company. And I think the thing that really resonated with me, and Cathy, you will also like, is like the founder, Nicole, she like one of her whole things is like, we need to own our choices and we need to like take responsibility for our own selves. And like a lot of people, and this was something she preached like long before the trial, like a lot of people want to, sort of blame the world or misogyny or just any different thing for like the things that are holding them back. But then that's sort of like, gives you an excuse to like define yourself as a victim and sort of, make that your identity and not move forward. And I think I'm, like sort of bastardizing what she says a little bit, but like that part really resonated with me because I think that is like such a huge problem with today's feminists. And then it's just so ironic that like then this trial comes along where that's like ultimately what is on trial. And of course, like none of the feminist media is speaking out in their defense at all. Because
It's
super
I'm
interesting.
still feeling the disconnect. Like, why wouldn't they, right?
Because so let me get in real quick about like how they said that this like went down. Like, okay, so in order to do forced labor, you need to like actually do violence or have threats of violence or like put people in captivity, none of which anyone even like alleges happened in this case, or cause serious harm. Serious harm like has a definition under federal law, but it's like a little bit vague. But generally, it means what you would think of colloquially as serious harm meaning. But the government in this case said like actually serious harm means like if they, like people said, well, I maybe didn't want to do this thing, but I felt like then I wouldn't be respected in the group, or then like the group would not want to like advance me into a position of leadership, or then like I wouldn't be like, able to do an orgasmic meditation demonstration if I didn't like align with these goals and take more classes. So like feeling this peer pressure to belong was a form, like making people feel this peer pressure to belong was a form of serious harm, and also making them feel like that, like
I have a
sexual
claim
activity was
against
good.
every startup I've ever worked for.
Right, exactly. So it was just like that was their definition of serious harm. So under that rubric is like how the trial proceeded. So you had all these victims. Again, they asked every single one of them, like the defense attorneys did, like, could you leave if you wanted to? Like, did you have somewhere else to go? Like, did you have access to computers? Could you have friends over? Could you have family over? Did you have access to email? Did you have access to phone? Like, could you go on out? Like, all of these things. Like, nobody was being trapped there or anything. And they were all like, yes, 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 yes. But they were like, but like, I like really wanted to advance to the next level of one taste. And if I didn't feel like, if I did like this like sex stuff with this investor, then people wouldn't want me to be like higher up at the company, and I wanted to be higher up at the company. And that was thing. And they're saying, well, now I don't believe that my choice was freely made because like I was pressured. Or one of them was like, well, like I was only 25 at the time. I was only 28. I was only 32. I was so young. My brain wasn't developed. Like all this stuff. So it's just this really crazy version of consent where they were literally arguing that the prosecutors and the people, the witnesses were arguing like, my consent didn't count. And they also asked them, did you tell anyone at the time that you didn't want to do it? Did you tell any, like your sexual activity partners? Did you tell the higher ups at one day? Did you tell anyone? No, 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 no. Like everyone answered no. So they were literally arguing, like, even though I said at the time I wanted to do it, even though I nominally consented at the time, even though no one was stopping me or threatening me or anything, years later, I have decided that I was psychologically unable to consent like 10 or 15 years ago, and therefore this is forced labor. And so that's why I think this case is so dangerous, because like that's sort of codifying like our worst, most extreme like ideas around consent that I don't think are helpful, but that have been like popularized in the past decade or so, and making them not just like ideas on campus, like campus activists or like feminist blogs, but like literally the way that the Department of Justice is going to start prosecuting things.
Well, and what they're really doing is saying, and this has been true from Operation Choke Point to probably before, certainly today, we don't like what you're doing,
Right.
and so we're going to find a way to make it fit into what is currently illegal.
Right, because forced labor is a human trafficking crime. So they're essentially saying, like, yeah, we don't like what you're doing. We don't like this like weird orgasmic meditation group, and which is like preaching, women's empowerment things, and so we're gonna make that into human trafficking.
Which is
And
wild
like,
because, like, we
yeah,
know what it looks like. Like, you hold their passports, like,
right,
you keep them away from computers. Like, we
right,
have millions of people in the United States of America right now who are actually being trafficked. They're usually domestic workers and agricultural
yeah,
workers. Like, we don't need to go after weird sex businesses. Like, that's just not
yeah.
necessary.
And that's why I think that this like also sort of resonates so much with me as like a thing that I'm, and I don't think enough people are paying attention to, because like it's really saying that like women's consent doesn't matter. Like in the guise of protecting women's like sexual, ability to not be sexually abused, they're actually saying their consent doesn't matter, because they're saying like, yeah, you consented, but like you were so fragile that even as a 25, 30, 35-year-old woman, you were actually unable to consent because you were rendered helpless by like ideas or by peer pressure or whatever. And therefore, which is essentially a way of saying that like women's consent isn't valid.
Okay, so
Well,
let me be the devil's advocate in this
Yeah.
situation because
yeah, we're too aligned.
well, yeah, so I mean, sex stuff is charged, and so I get that. But don't we call lots of entities, don't we refer to high demand religions, or organizations that control what you wear, who you spend time with, all these things that we've defined as being culty? And most of it, no one's like, if you're looking at that IBLP thing, I forget what the initials are. I'm terrible at all those initials, but um, shit. The 19 Kids and Counting, that organization that they were part of,
Oh, yeah.
the Duggars. When you talk
Oh yeah,
about,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, so you talk about, no one's holding a gun to their head, no one's no one's threatening to hurt them, but then they are making decisions that we would all think, why are they doing that? I think that there are lots of people who leave high control religions who are calling it a cult, who feel like they've been extorted. Mormons, for example, a lot of ex Mormons would say they've been extorted of money, and there was no physical threat. It was all just social threat, social pressure, social involvement, wanting to be at a higher level, more involved. And so how is that different for these women that that that's maybe said, or maybe they were coerced, but that aside, that they were controlled by the social pressure, or the need to please, the need to not fail. I mean, most humans have been subject to that now and again. To what degree, it
Yeah.
obviously varies. But
So I would say that if these women were just like going on their social media accounts and calling it a cult, going in the media, attacking your reporters, writing a book, like whatever, going on their Substack podcast and being like, look, I was in this group and it was a cult,
yeah,
that would be not a big deal. Like, I mean, like maybe so, like I talked to a lot of people who have very positive things to say about their time with One Taste. And like, obviously there's at least, a couple dozen people that were in this trial who have negative things. So like, I don't want to say like what it actually was or wasn't, but if they were just saying it, like that would be one thing. But it's not illegal to be a cult, and
right.
that's not what they were on trial for. So I think what bothers me about this is that like this has gone from just like people talking bad about it or arguing in the like court of public opinion about it, to the Department of Justice like sort of bringing these human trafficking charges that don't actually fit anything that had to do with it,
Mhm.
in order to punish them, when maybe because they thought it was a cult, but it's not a crime, because like being a cult
Right.
is subjective. Like I think
Yeah.
like this was actually came up at trial, and the defense lawyers were like talking to someone who was really involved with CrossFit and all the things they had to do with part of CrossFit, and like like arguing like by this like rubric, like CrossFit could be a cult. Like so many things. I think whether or not it's a cult is really just a matter of like how socially accepted the ideas or the activities are, more
Mhm.
so than any like objective criteria.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of Bill Gothard and trafficking, I listened to a podcast about this woman who had survived, who had grown up in, her family was very involved in the Gothard milieu, and talked about, and she'd done also a bunch of reporting. And so Bill Gothard's brother lived on some compound somewhere else and wrote most of the books that were the majority of their income. And so he was just cranking out all these books about how to raise your family, how to be a good father, biblical nutrition, like every aspect of your life. They would have reams and reams of books and sell all these books and make tons of money. Well, if you were a family in the cult and your daughter, Bill Gothard took a liking to your daughter, then he would go to the daughter's family, the daughter's parents, and say, we think Maria's really special. We think she's really a good fit to go work for my brother at the compound. Meanwhile, they're preaching abstinence, they're preaching anti-pornography, obviously anti-sex work. This is before the internet, and he's mailing like packets of pornography to his brother to keep him writing this stuff. And people are sending their young daughters to this guy to live with him. And of course they were both weird with young daughters. So yeah, I mean, if you're interested in, like, I can see why the right would be real concerned about this precedent.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so that's the other thing too, though, is that like in this case, it's not even like this was like borderline, like, oh, some of the people were like 18, 19, 20, like
right. No, they're
all of the
grown up
people that were
women.
victims, were very grown women too. So I think that's also very different. Like it's different.
Yeah.
Like, are the people involved where it's just like you could conceivably say, I mean, obviously at any age you can fall like victim to pressure and do
Sure.
things, that you later regret. But like the idea that like, 20 something and 30 something women cannot, are too young or too fragile to consent to being a part of this, even if it is a little bit manipulative, or even if it was, like, I think
Yeah,
is
when they can
just
find their own jobs, sign their own
right.
leases, they can do all these things, and yeah, it's not. What was have they been sentenced?
Not no, they've not been sentenced yet. So they were found guilty in June, and they're awaiting sentencing. They were denied bail because so they've just even though again, like these are two women that are like they run like
Shocking.
they run like a group for like teaching women in prison like how to write. Like they do like, I mean, they're just like, there's no reason they're like a danger to the community in that way, but they said like that their supporters in the media, like some bloggers and stuff like that, and some of the one-taste like supporters had been like too rude about the victims, so therefore they had to like be denied bond. So those kind of, so now they're just been they've been in prison since June. I mean, they've been and they're still awaiting sentencing. I think, like they're really hoping to do something on appeal. They didn't really mount a defense because the judge ruled that basically anything that their witnesses couldn't really talk about anything if it hadn't been like brought up already by the prosecutors. I don't know. I like sometimes the ways that prosecutors can get around letting people defend themselves just shock me still. Like I'm continually surprised by about it. I don't know enough about it, but both in the Backpage case and this one, I've just been like so surprised by the things they were not allowed to say. So I think they basically felt like they were unable to defend themselves and that they just kind of gave up on trial, and they were just like, fine, like we're not calling witnesses. We will just like try to do something on appeal with us.
I keep getting stuck on this, like, why haven't feminists or liberals like come to these women's defense? And I do think that it's probably a bunch of things. One thing I feel like is that there's a big fight in feminism. I don't even know if it's a fight anymore, but like there's a big strain in feminism of opposition to girl boss feminism
Yeah.
or like choice feminism. And this just seems like a pretty perfect example of like, we're not just gonna like close the orgasm gap out of the out of the
Kindness of our
goodness of our
hearts.
hearts.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we're gonna make it into a business. And I think that a lot of lefties and feminists like kind of have a an aesthetic aversion to, which I don't think is helpful.
Yeah.
uh,
But you know what is interesting too is that like when you mentioned startup culture before, I think that's really like what was going on there too, because like they in
yeah,
court they showed their salaries and like the two defendants were making like almost no money for the first like few years. Like Nicole was making literally no money for some of it. Like they were making like $5,000, $12,000, $20,000 at most, like except for like 1 year. Like one of the defendants was making like $40,000. And so it's like
well,
they were not getting rich. Like they were really doing it. And like it seems like a lot of the stuff that was objected to was like we all lived together and we cooked for each other and we did all this stuff because everybody was true believers. And some people weren't getting paid, but like they knew they weren't getting paid. They were just like volunteers because they wanted to be part of the
Mhm.
community. It just seems very much like that was how it was in the first like 10 years. And then like later when now they're like the prosecutors are like, look at this. They like did this. They didn't get paid. And it's like, yeah, but that was because now you're thinking of it as this like I mean, ultimately, it ended up making a lot of money, but you're like, now you're thinking of it as this huge money making business. But like when this happened, it was, yeah. But yeah, I think that you're right. Like there's this perception of them because they ultimately ended up sort of getting New York Times profiles and all this stuff. And like Nicole did a TED talk and all this. So it's like, yeah, they got very much slotted into that model, even though I think it was much more like they were just sort of like hustling as a sort of startup people too. But sorry, go on. You were going to say something else too about why feminists didn't.
no, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I didn't think about it, but that they weren't profitable for a long time makes more sense to me when you think about like what they're actually selling. It's not software. It's not infinitely
Yeah,
scalable, right? Um, uh, I think the other thing, I think that there's a tendency on the left to kind of slot people into victim villain
yes.
roles, and that we've slotted women into victim roles. And certainly, like, if it's between women and men, the woman is a victim. If it's between customers and founders or CEOs, the customer is the victim. um and then I think that there's this huge problem of like sex is magic.
Yeah,
So for some reason, 17-year-old, 18-year-old woman can consent to cleaning toilets for a living, but when it comes to taking her clothes off on stage, the age of consent should be 25, 30.
right.
Like there's no age at which a woman could possibly consent to taking her clothes off for money.
Yeah, I think you're like this right. So there was like, obviously there were a lot of like salacious details at the trial too. Like they had this one major investor and like they put on like BDSM scenes for him where they would like get like, like a dozen people and they'd enact some sort of like Wizard of Oz themed sexual fantasy for him or like some like, things like that. There were also like some women who were like Nicole's assistant would like be in charge of jacking off this guy who was her boyfriend and an investor. And that was their job. And so like I mean like and that's the stuff that made it in the newspaper. Like they were forced to do this. But it's like again, like I read every page of or like I read all the trial transcripts. Like if you actually read it, it's like they're all like, did you know that's what you were going to do? Yes. Like, why did you want to do it? Because it was considered prestigious within the organization. Like a lot of these women, like some of these women testified that they were also engaging in sex work like on their own accord, either before they joined One Taste or totally independent of anything One Taste was doing with them. Like, so like this as like another form of sex work or however they thought of it, like did not seem to bother them at the time. But of course now when you say like, oh my gosh, like she made her assistant jack off her boyfriend, like, and that's what gets in the newspaper, I feel like, and nobody wants to look beyond like, okay, but like everyone says they consented to that at the time. It wasn't like these were employees that she was like, oh, you're already my employee, now do this. Like it was like these were enthusiasts of the group who were already like wanting to be a part of it and then did it. So it's, like the lines are really blurry. And I understand why casual observers are just like, oh, well, that seems predatory. But yeah,
right, but I um did intermittent fasting and ate uh keto at different times for the same startup for 2 weeks straight, each experiment. So like For the same reason, because like
Yeah.
I wanted to succeed in that job because they were pressuring me to do it, to be part of the team. And it's like, if you'd said, okay, you can, yeah, I think it was for one of them, I don't even remember which it was, but I was so ill I couldn't work. Like I could barely get out of bed to get water. I was so weak. And if you'd said you could either do that or give the founder's boyfriend a hand job, I would have hand jobbed it like immediately, like no question. Absolutely. But for some reason, because sex is magic, I
Right,
can consent
exactly.
to being so sick I can't get out of bed, but I can't consent to a hand job.
Right. I mean, yeah. I was
But I
like,
would, can I say though,
yes.
there is a much bigger fear, particularly when we're talking about age of consent, that young women, girls, are going to be. I mean, it, it's different than intermittent fasting. I mean, and I'm not saying maybe I am agreeing that sex is magic, but I do think that there is a risk of more damage occurring to someone who isn't consenting to that behavior because maturation is on a continuum, right? Some 16-year-olds are completely mature enough to make certain kinds of decisions, and some 21-year-olds aren't. Let's just say, if we're going to do that. And so I get it, but and maybe I'm just, another old-fashioned prude. I don't know. I could be. It's possible. But I do think that that's part of the reason we make these what appear to be sort of arbitrary rules because people need to be protected that way because the vulnerability is greater than.
Well, the stigmatization is greater. If I say I I did something that made me physically ill for my employer in America in 2025, that's a badge of honor. Like you're a great
Oh, no.
employee.
I've worked
If I
35
say,
hours straight before, and yeah, and I'm like, "Oh, I just ran home for 10 minutes and took a shower and didn't eat." Or yeah, I get I
yeah, you brag about it. But if you give a hand job for money, like most people are not going to brag about that. It's heavily stigmatized. And so, yeah, I understand why we would be more cautious about whether and to what extent someone s- consents to one versus the other. Not because there's anything inherently, sure, it's better for your health to give a hand job than to work for 35 hours straight, but there's a difference in stigma.
There was
Okay,
these
so maybe
um
that's me speaking.
yeah, there was these amazing, like, the government contorted themselves into circles to, like, in this too, where they were like, they talked to some people who were like, yeah, like, I was a sex worker before, or I started getting involved in sex work, like, while I was in One Taste, but not because, like, the One Taste people were doing it, just because I wanted to, like, pay for my One Taste courses and stuff like that. And they actually use that as evidence, like, oh, so you felt so pressured to take more One Taste classes that you had
Mm.
to do sex work to engage in it. But anyways, they're like, "Could you talk about your sex work at One Taste?" And they were like, "No, they actually, like, discouraged it because they didn't want people to think that we were, like, a sex work organization. Like, they wanted us to think we're doing this, like, meditative practice and we weren't involved in sex work." And they said it was, like, people knew, but we weren't supposed to, like, make it a big part of our thing because they didn't want us to be, like, a sex work group, you know? And the government was like, they wouldn't let you talk about how you were a
Mm.
sex worker. Like, that is harm. And it was like suddenly the government is mad that people were like, and like it was like one of the leadership discouraged one of the girls from like doing like full service sex work, and like the government was like, like use that as like a slant like against them. And it was just like, it was just incredible the things that the government was willing to defend in this case because they were trying to like, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, there was the thing where they asked where the clitoris was, which you referenced at the beginning, which was, I mean, like, there was like talk about fisting and flogging. I was just like, I wonder how often these terms have been used in federal court because there was a lot of, yeah.
That's really funny. But something you alluded to earlier that I really want to like go into a little bit is that I think there's an effort on the right more to erase the concept of consent, or like kind of the idea is that like on the right, it's like women can't consent because they're not in charge of their own bodies ultimately. Like the
Yeah.
men, their fathers and then their husbands are will do the consenting for them. Thank you very much. But then on the left, it's like there's a sex is magic and an infantilization of women that removes our agency. But in reality, like, it's just complicated. Like, consent is not a binary. It's not
Right.
yes or no. It's shades of gray. Age is a proxy for what is what consent rests on, which is, do you have the power to say yes or no? Do you have the information to say yes or no? Um, and uh, and I just think that's a really like underappreciated point in these things, that like there's there's no exchange under scarcity that's fully consensual, because we all have to feed ourselves, clothe ourselves, and obtain shelter, and so we all have to do things that, absent the coercion of starving to death, we would not do.
Yeah, I just think that it really worries me though that these like sort of nuances of consent are going to become like legal standards, right? Like, yes, like consent is not a binary and it's messy, but also like having sort of like federal law enforcement authorities like decide where the messiness like lies is really dangerous, because like, yes, like no means no, or even yes means yes as a standard, like maybe not perfect, but at least has the benefit of like as a legal standard, like sort of showing where the boundaries lie. And like, if this case is any indication, it's like, again, like you can say, like, I consented to stuff. I was able to say no. I was not threatened. I was not like financially dependent on these, like all of these things. But like, because of some sort of like power imbalances that are very like complicated and dynamic, like it didn't actually count in a legal way. And therefore, this is trafficking. And like, that's really scary to me.
No, I agree. It's very problematic. It reminds me weirdly, I don't know if this is an analogy that's going to make sense to anyone else, but I remember talking to people, mostly reading people who looked at the situation of people living in unsafe buildings in mostly in Oakland, and said, because they couldn't afford housing, they couldn't afford standard housing, and so they would convert these warehouses into housing, but they wouldn't do it to the extent that they were actually safe to inhabit. And so, like, the ghost ship fire was an example of they had, and supposedly, um, they had been using extension cords to light the bedrooms, but supposedly a building inspector came through and said, none of this is legal, confiscated their extension cords, and so they had been lighting it with candles, and that's part of how it caught fire. And so it's like, you say, well, we need to build more housing so that people stop living in poorly converted, halfway converted warehouses and burning to death. And the NIMBYs, the left NIMBYs would say, no, we just need to enforce the building codes, enforce landlords to do their jobs. And, if we just make the laws against slumlording strict enough and we enforce them hard enough, then the landlords will start providing adequate shelter, despite the fact that it's not cost effective for them to do so. And I'm thinking, like, in what world can you go around, and could it possibly, wouldn't it wouldn't it be more cost effective to just build new buildings than to hire enough building inspectors and send them out often enough and like do whatever it takes to force landlords to conform to your vision of reality? Like, you can't use the criminal justice system to do what the market is supposed to provide. Like, landlords should be competing for tenants, not the other way around. That's why they abuse the tenants, because they can. And so similarly with employment, like, you can try to make it illegal for people to do sex work, for example. That doesn't tend to work. What tends to work better is just to give women who don't want to be doing, and men who don't want to be doing sex work, better options, right? Just like,
Right.
if
And
you don't want people,
Yeah, and then, like, cases like this, like, again, like, yeah, as I mentioned, like, nobody said, I didn't, I couldn't leave, I didn't have anywhere else to go, I didn't have, my documents, I didn't have, like, nobody said
Mhm.
that. So, again, it's, like, same sort of thing, like, the market should take care of this. Like, if this was a bad employment situation or a bad fit or people felt coerced or whatever they're now saying that they felt, then, like, there's no reason they couldn't leave. But we can't just, like, retroactively define all bad employment situations as trafficking and just say, like, well, if we just prosecute any employment situation that's less than optimal. Because again, too, like, this ends up where it allows the Department of Justice to weaponize things too. Because, like, they can choose, and, like, in the landlord thing, like, they could choose the people who are doing the most obvious, like, like, code violations. Like, in this, it's like, well, how are you gonna weaponize, like, as you mentioned, like, you did the intermittent fasting for your employers, you worked, like, 36 hours. How are you gonna choose which employment practices that could be, like, harmful or could be coercive or could be considered damaging, like, you're gonna go after? And it's inevitably gonna be people who are, like, considered on the fringes, like, their ideas or their
Mhm.
practices and stuff. So, like, yeah, like, it can be weaponized against an orgasmic meditation company or something like that. It's inevitably going to target, I think, like, people who are already vulnerable to being marginalized, rather than necessarily people who are, like, actually the worst offenders in any sort of way.
Mhm.
And I think that there's a portion of the left and feminists who want to punish women who
Yeah,
they think are um, holding women back or making women look bad or what do they say? They're objectifying, self-objectifying, or
yeah,
whatever it is. Like it's always there's always a desire to like make sure that it's not safe for women to do things that they don't want them to choose to do.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the fact that they were able to, like, bring up sort of any sort of sex work adjacent elements to this, I think, was just turned a lot of people off of defending it just because, you know.
But then there's also that because I feel like what'll happen is that sex workers will work together. Like, I think they've really come together with the Supreme Court ruling. There's the Free Speech Coalition. Like, there's definitely some
Oh, yeah.
solidarity in the like adult industry for rights and recognition and things like that. But when you say like, no, 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 we're not doing sex work, then you kind of like I understand why they would do it because
Yeah,
sex work
because, I
is
mean,
so
they weren't.
stigmatized.
So, yeah.
And what I mean, I would
Yeah.
I would put that under the umbrella of sex work, certainly, but I understand why they wouldn't want to. But then you kind of alienate yourself from that those people who they're like, "Oh, so, you didn't want to associate with us, but now you need the solidarity."
Yeah. I mean, yes, I'm very sensitive to people doing that. I understand this though, because even though, like I said, like, there was the, like, elements of, like, sexual activity in the beginning, like, that was more like about the startup culture hustle. Like, the actual business model of the group did not really seem. I would not call it a sex work group, even though, like, yeah, even though it was selling sexual, like, wellness culture, even though there were group people getting together, but yeah,
Well, that
I
wasn't
see
the
what
way
I
they were
see what you're
marketing
saying.
themselves as. I mean, it doesn't seem like.
Like, to me, sex work is an umbrella term that
Yeah,
encompasses like phone sex operators, people who write erotica for money. Like, if what you're providing is an erotic service, then I think you fall
then it's
under the
sex work,
umbrella.
yeah.
Yeah, except for that's not what they were marketing their business as.
It's called orgasmic
It's
meditation. That was the like tagline. So
Yeah.
right, but I think that the way you couch it is that it is therapeutic, it is empowering, it
that's what
the
sex
fact.
work is. Those things.
I know, but the fact that that you ended up having an orgasm because of that, it doesn't seem like I don't know, maybe I'm not reading this right, but it doesn't seem like when you describe it that that was their primary. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe
I mean, I think all of this just speaks to the, like.
it's more like one of those yoga studios. I mean, that's what or or was that Orange Bar or something? I don't know. I walk past these places, so I don't ever go inside.
I mean, that's one of the things that they've said in their defense too, is like yoga was considered like incredibly sexual, like in its day, and like very much feared as like a way to like lure women to their doom. So yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
mean, I think that
absolutely
all of this,
true.
yeah, all of this just speaks to our like
No,
weird
not that it was
inability to
leading
talk
people
about.
to their doom. The fact that yoga, the origin of yoga and the yogis is not what suburban soccer moms are doing at the YMCA at 9 o'clock on Saturday. I mean, the origination was a much
Yeah,
different thing than,
definitely.
yeah. Not that it was evil leading women to their doom.
No, but there was like a
Like,
lot of like there was a lot of media at the time that said that it
yeah.
was. Like I went deep into like newspaper archives looking at all these things about like the Hindu yoga mystics, like the swarthy skinned men who were like seducing American women. Like there was like a whole lot
But
of
there was.
newspaper panic about that.
Oh, totally. And there have been people who exploited that and did create cults and were sexually exploitive of women. I mean, so it's, back then there were instances, not to say that every instance, but there were definitely instances. Um, Julian, sorry, I talked to someone named Julio today. Julian had a question. Did you see it, Kathy?
Can you read it to us?
Coming in late, but curious to hear reactions to the Pedicon essay in Liberal Currents, if it hasn't come up.
I didn't see it. I don't know. Did you read
Yeah.
it?
No.
Okay.
Julian, comment yes
Sorry.
if you wanted to join us again and tell us what you're referring to again. That was fun last week. We haven't read it yet.
Oh yeah, I saw someone sharing this earlier today. Okay, yeah, but I didn't read it yet.
Paul was here earlier too. I love Liberal Currents. I've been published in there. Good stuff.
What kind of publication is it?
It's kind of a mix. They're making a case for liberalism, and it's a mix of like op-eds as you would imagine them,
Mm-hmm.
but a little more Locke and Paine and like the more like philosophical underpinnings of liberalism, like the concept. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. So this started under Biden, the one taste
Yeah,
prosecution,
yeah.
which I think is interesting. And like Kamala
Well, actually,
Harris.
the investigation started under Trump, the first Trump administration. And then
Okay,
the
Oh.
all right.
prosecutions, like the actual indictment happened under Biden. Yeah. So now this has been through like both conservative and Democratic administrations.
Mm.
Yeah, and Kamala Harris is the kind of main architect, as far as I can tell, certainly sponsor of Sesta Fosta, which was a very deleterious law in terms of sex worker health and safety. So
What did it do?
Liz is definitely the expert here, but it made platforms liable if it was found that sex traffickers were using the platforms to advertise. So, if you are a sex worker, the safest way to find and vet clients is online. So you put up an ad, and then you get
Mhm.
responses, and then you vet, and then you meet in real life. Well, there's nothing necessarily stopping a trafficker from advertising a trafficking victim in a similar way. And so Section 230 said if you're a platform, you're not criminally liable if people use your platform in this way to advertise illegal services. And Sesta Fosta changed that. It made a carve out to those protections that said, okay, for sex trafficking particularly, which sex trafficking is a tiny percentage of overall human
Mm-hmm.
trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
The vast majority of people advertising online for sexual services are consenting adults, blah, blah, blah. And before the law passed, law enforcement said, this is not going to work. Not only is it not going to work, it's going to make sex trafficking worse. Because
it's not going to give a legitimate platform for people who are legitimately making a living that way.
number one,
if you convict them of
Yeah.
crimes or
It also separately made it a crime to host a website that facilitates prostitution, not sex trafficking, but just any sort of prostitution, of more than 5 people. So like it, instituted like a major chilling effect on any speech surrounding sex, because people were really worried, like what, or it was promote or facilitate. So people were like, what does promote mean? Like if you're like defending sex worker rights, like in mass, like, does that mean you're like promoting the prostitution of people? Like, what if you're just like a group like Ugly Mugs that like sends out like sex worker safety alerts? Like so it's sort of really yeah, had a major chilling effect on online speech about sex in general too, because it just like people were so afraid of the liability they'd be under.
and
And then there's
platforms were
only
so
been
afraid.
one prosecution under it too. They were like, we need to pass this immediately because it's so urgent for stopping all of this like online sex trafficking that's happening. And now there's been one prosecution in the past 5, 6, 7 years since it passed. So
But
yeah.
a bunch of sex workers have died. Um, a lot of them have killed themselves because they have been forced to work outdoors to find clients, and their income has gone down. Um, the websites they use to share safety information, the platforms went through and just started like deleting people's files off of Google Drive without alerting them, because like out of an abundance of caution. And the other thing is like the platform owners didn't want the sex trafficking happening, even if they weren't criminally liable. So they would give tips to law enforcement. They would
Yeah.
notice the patterns of like, hey, this looks like an ad for a trafficking victim. And so and law enforcement, Amnesty International, The WHO, The Lancet, like everybody says, like the best way to find and rescue trafficking victims is to work with sex workers, not against them. And so like, yeah, and Paris knew all this before the law went into effect. Law enforcement said that's what's happened. And so, yeah, it's this idea that like that the United States is sex positive, or that the left is so libertine and sex positive, like it's just not borne out in any way, shape, or form by the
Yeah.
facts on the ground.
Can I say, I know we have to,
I'm a very, like I've said, liberal, politically very left, but I've lived a very personally conservative life in terms of my own experience. But it's obvious we have these wretched puritanical ideas that influence things like that, and I don't get it. Why? I mean, that is something I do not understand, even though um my own personal life has been pretty quiet in that department. I don't understand why these puritanical things. So we're not sex positive. We're so not as a society if you're around the rest of the world at all.
um yeah, no, I was just gonna add to like, I don't, yeah, I've just seen today like all this. There's all this like a new bill that's like it's going to be illegal for AI creators to train their models on anyone's personal data or anyone's images or whatever that don't give their consent. And like there's all that, like, like you guys have probably seen. There's all this like fuss about that these days. But like right around the time that like the FOSTA was passed too, like the government was funding so much research on training large language models for AI companies on sex worker ads. Like there's so much out there where like there was like a whole like DARPA, the Defense Advanced
Mhm.
Research Project Administration, yeah, like funded so much like AI training on like Backpage ads and other like sex worker ads at the time. I think it's so interesting because like I was like trying to write about this at the time and like no one cared. And it was just like no one cared when AI was being trained on copyrighted works and personal data from massive troves of sex workers. And now everyone's like, oh my God, they're using my personal data. They're using my books to trade copyright. And it's now become this huge issue. And I just think it's so interesting how no one cared when it was all being done on sex workers. Anyways, that's like totally tangential to everything we're talking about. But
No, not at all, because it's a
I
perfect
keep thinking
example of
about this
like
today. Yeah.
the there is a desire to punish women who act badly. Like, if you're a woman who goes through the world and is annoyed with the fact that, like, you're, you get sexual harassment or sexual attention that you don't want, somehow that's like, well, this woman puts ads on the internet to sell her body, so somehow that's given this other man permission
Yeah.
to treat me in a way I don't like. So I know I can't do anything about this man, so I'm gonna punish this woman. That's, like, really the mentality.
Yeah.
So if the government is doing bad things to her that I wouldn't want done to a good woman, well, that's all part of my ethos of punishing the bad women to separate
Yeah.
the good and the bad women so I get treated better.
And just and so I'll just to like and I should probably go in a second, but like just to bring this back, to the one thing, like that was a thing that was very much on display in the trial too. Like Nicole Daydon, like she had done sex work in her past, and the prosecutors brought that up in court. Like they weren't allowed to talk about any of the like pasts of the witnesses on the stand, which is because of various things. But like even though that was. But like they talked about her sexual past so much, like, and they did so much, like, just like they talked about like how much she spent on things. Like they were trying to introduce evidence, like this is how much she spent on like spa services and blah blah blah. And like just like they really, really tried really hard to like use her sexual history and like try to portray her as this like frivolous woman who does bad sex things. And it was like very apparent, that they were trying to sort of to use that dichotomy to like make the jury dislike her and make this more about stuff like that than about than the actual charges.
The fallen woman, the tainted woman,
Yes,
absolutely.
exactly. They actually said too, they considered them witches. There was like a whole thing where they were like talking about how they were
Oh
maybe
my
witches.
gosh.
So it was like I was like, this is like a literal witch hunt.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
How many women were
So
in the jury?
I don't actually know how many women were on the jury. That's a good question. I didn't know.
And if you have to
Yeah.
go, but before you go, what is the possible sentence that they could face?
I think they could face up to 20 years in prison.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's really, really
So,
crazy.
Meanwhile, wage theft, totally not a problem. Like, never investigated, never prosecuted.
yeah.
Right.
No, like all the forms of like all the like industries where actual sort of labor trafficking is rampant. I mean, this is what we always say though, about the obsession with sex trafficking too. Like it's just it's such a minuscule thing compared to how much of like other sort of labor abuses there are that don't get paid attention to.
That, and it doesn't look anything like what it gets talked about like. It gets
Yeah.
talked about like there's brown guys driving around in vans abducting white women from Target parking lots willy-nilly.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not
Yeah.
how it
Yeah.
works ever.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the last election, I think there was a group of women, primarily white women, who that fear is enough in their brain that they said, okay, just in case, I guess I'm going to vote for Trump. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of is that they have this irrational fear that someone is going to snatch them out of the parking lot.
Well, and so I keep saying like I have to go, and then I'm like, and now here I
Oh,
want to say
sorry.
something else. But but like I mean, part of this too is I think because sex trafficking doesn't happen like in the movies or like at all, mostly like the federal statute would there's not enough cases, right? There's not enough
Right.
cases, at least. I'm not saying there's not cases, but there's not enough cases to meet the narrative that was pushed for 2 decades, where there's like hundreds of thousands of sex trafficking victims out there. And that is why we see cases like the One Taste case and cases like the Backpage case. I mean, neither of those actually involve sex trafficking charges, but they've both been portrayed that way. And
Mhm.
why we see all these cases where they're trying to drastically expand the definition, the legal definition of trafficking, to catch all of these people who are not at all what we would think of in the popular definition of trafficking, because like they need to justify these statutes. They need to justify the massive budgets that they like every year.
Mhm.
Congress is approving more and more money for fighting trafficking. Like they need like they've militarized police more and more based on trafficking. Like they've done so much and they need to justify it, and they can't justify it if they don't have arrests and prosecutions, and they can't actually get enough arrests and prosecutions based on actual trafficking. So
Yeah.
they have to expand the definition to encompass like all of this stuff that we might just that no one would generally think of as trafficking. So I think that's the sort of like we were talking at the beginning about why they're doing this, and like that's the
Mhm.
galaxy brain explanation. Which, but I do think that there is like a component of that. Like not that like individual prosecutors are necessarily thinking that way, but like there is definitely a component of that at some higher level within the Department of
And
Justice.
right, and a cultural thing that happens, right? It's not like every
Yeah.
TV reporter is a liberal, but there is a cultural kind of bias in a certain kind of
Yes.
environment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the closest we have to an actual trafficker, Jeffrey Epstein, didn't was let go for many years and ignored. So, yeah, clearly, what we're doing is not working. Okay,
Oh, I thought
we're
you were gonna
gonna.
mention that the president's name was found today in the
So you and I are gonna talk about that after
Okay.
we let Liz go. Thank you for
Liz, it
being
was
so generous
so
with your
great to
time.
meet you and talk with you.
Yeah, it
Thank
was good
you.
to meet you. Thank you. I love Kathy's Substack, and yeah,
Oh,
I think it's so
thank
wonderful all
you.
the time. So I'm
And
really glad to be here and talking with you guys. And I'm excited to listen to the podcast going forward too. So
Wonderful.
thank
Thank you so
you.
much. Thank you for the
Welcome.
work you
Good
do.
night.
Incredible reporter.
thanks
Yep.
guys.
Good
Bye.
night.
Bye.
Figure out how to get out of here.
Okay.
It's just us. Just us and 41 of our closest friends and family.
Aw, someone said his hearts.
No. Thank you,
You.
Sophia. I'm sorry you can't ask Liz. I mean, you can ask Liz questions. You'll have to DM them to her. We can try to answer them from her perspective. Or you can just ask those questions or comments or whatever. Julian, thank you for your thoughts. Mom, thanks for chiming in. Um, yeah, so the Epstein situation.
I actually was from like 9 o'clock this morning until right before this. I was in back-to-back meetings all day. I only had breaking news. My husband came into my office with a couple of breaking news announcements, and that was one of them that Trump's name was in the Epstein records.
I, for one, was shocked uh, when I heard that.
Why?
No, I'm kidding. I
Oh,
mean, he's
I'm
a
sorry.
convicted rapist. He's bragged about grabbing
No,
him
no,
by the
no.
pussy.
I'm sorry that I
I have
didn't
more
get the
photos. We have
sarcasm.
more photos with Trump with Epstein than I have with my grandparents. Like, no, like what? Like, of
No,
course.
I'm sorry I didn't catch the sarcasm. It's been a long day.
Speaking of overwork,
Oh man, it
speaking of
was
labor conditions.
yeah, it was well, I think I need to file a complaint because it was 85 degrees in my office this afternoon.
What? How?
Yeah. Well, because the thermostat is in this sheltered little place. So if it's set for 73 or 4 and the sun is shining in my office over there in the late afternoon and I'm working away and I have to stay in there. I think that's adverse, inhumane working conditions. And I'll have to take it up with, um, I don't know who, the person myself, the person who's also on the title of our house. I don't know.
At least we're first floor. Can you imagine being second or
No.
above? Yeah, it's been real hot here in Huntsville, Alabama. Real
and
hot. I don't
humid.
go
I mean,
outside.
even inside with full-time AC, the humidity's been up around 60% some days. Well, that's
Yeah.
too high. Anyway, so but that's not that that's not to talk about the weather is not why we're here. Um, so I will have to say that I am becoming quite enlightened and exposed to stuff that I hadn't been. I think that's good. I think it's good. You know, we always want to, for example, for me, I have always thought that I would feel a certain way about certain things. But, sometimes it's theoretical. So it's theoretical that you are okay with your kid dating a trans person until your kid's dating a trans person, right? And then you don't know how you're going to act. And I do know how I'm going to act. And it was totally just as I thought it would be, not an issue. And so, same with sex work. I've had a couple friends who were sex workers over the years, and I try to be really like, I think I'm okay. Like, I'm not judgy about that, even given that I've spent, 30 years in the Mormon church and the whole thing. But I will say that I have not been exposed to the variety of things the same way, right? I know very mainstream is what I'm thinking and what I've been exposed to in just, people I've known. And so it's actually quite interesting and enlightening to hear her perspective about the outcome of this trial after having only read the press release. So I just read the press release, and to hear her perspective on that, right? And it comes across very different in the press release. Um, and, like, I would never have even thought of that. Like, you actually walked past their storefront or whatever it was. I hope it wasn't big glass windows that this was meditation was happening. That would be a lot, but but, like, you spent some time living in San Francisco and actually came upon this in the wild.
I did, yeah. And in San Francisco, yeah, it would have been perfectly legal if they had been in the storefront, and but they
Mhm.
were not. Um, yeah, it's so funny. A person was like, I wish I could remember who I was with, but they were like, no, it's a cult, and I was like, can't have anything nice, can we?
I don't know, like, the cult thing, I really did when I read it, I was thinking, "Oh, wow, that's like Synanon or, some of these other cults where they put people to work." Um,
Those are kind of the two. I love the Behind the Bastards podcast, and they do a lot of cult leaders, and they kind of make a deal of it. I've never heard of a cult where they don't make you work. You always have to work. And usually there's a sex component, but not always. But usually
yeah,
there is.
Hare Krishna, right? That you had to work, the Synanon thing is kind of interesting because it has kind of spun off, and my son worked for a construction company here in Huntsville where they had people who were post incarceration, lived in a halfway house that was kind of set up like this, and they were set up and they had to go work, and they weren't getting paid what the regular employees were getting paid. So I mean, it's very bizarre to me, but Jim Jones, I think, when he was in the Midwest before and then when they were in the Bay Area, they were, they had to figure out a way to get money, and so they have
Right.
people work, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess. Well, and even this, like, I can't believe that the markup for the services or the classes are that high at the beginning, right? When they're first starting as a startup.
Yeah. No, it sounds like it wasn't super big. The demand was not super high. They had to kind of create it. It's interesting too to think about like who is susceptible to joining a cult. And I think I've been thinking a lot about what made me susceptible to the negative aspects of evangelical Christianity, because a lot of people are grew, a lot of people grow up exactly as I do in terms of like same kind of church, in it 3
Mhm.
times a week. They go to the camps, but like they're not spitting mad and like still bitching about it at 40 years old. And so, and I noticed like even when I was a kid, being just like so baffled by the people who would say like I'm a Christian and like say they believed X, Y, and Z, but then it didn't really seem to be that big a deal to them one way or another. It didn't seem to impact their life or their choices. And I always thought that was just very strange to me. And so I think there are personality aspects like you want somebody who's a little bit vulnerable, right? In some way, shape, or form. Like, I think one thing that made me really vulnerable was I really wanted like a set of rules to follow because my intuition was quite bad. And so rules made me feel safe. And a lot of times, from what I've read, something that makes somebody vulnerable and something that also made me vulnerable was loneliness. You know, somebody who like really wants the sense of community, has trouble making friends. Um, but you don't want somebody who's too credulous or too lonely because then they can't really contribute and they end up taking resources that the group needs rather than adding to the group. And so it's kind of an interesting like line to walk as far as like who to recruit and how to identify the people
But
who are
would you
vulnerable.
say, like, so I was Mormon for all those years. I would not say I was a member of a cult. I think there were cult-like things, but I always knew I could walk away. I did end up walking away. I didn't ever feel like, um, I didn't feel like there was a single person who was, David Koresh, Jim Jones, whoever, controlling. uh, Maybe I'm just being naive. A lot of people would say Mormonism and evangelical Christianity are cults. I don't view my experience in that way. I think there are cult-like aspects to it, but um yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think cult is a good like what am I trying to say, like slang? Like it's a
Yeah.
useful term to throw around, but as far as like a scientific, like this falls into it and this doesn't, it kind of falls apart because I think the thing that would differentiate a cult from a group would be consent. And as we've established, consent is not a binary, it's messy and
Yeah.
it's multifaceted. And so, like, for me, where I feel like the evangelical Christianity is not a fully cooperative, is a fundamentally coercive institution, is that they use the threat of literal eternal torment, like
Mhm.
hell being a literal place, is a as a method of control. Like if you question what you've been taught, if you question your faith, if you opt outside of the faith, like they don't exactly say if you sin you will spend eternity in hell. It's a little more sophisticated than that, but not much. It's like, well, if you're
Mhm.
sinning, clearly you're not saved, and if you're not saved, you're going to spend an eternity in hell. And so then you're constantly kind of like both examining yourself for sin to make sure you don't end up in hell and afraid. I think that's what I'm like most angry about from my time in evangelical
Yeah.
Christianity is that I was afraid to examine myself because I was afraid of what I would find and what it would mean for eternity for me. And that just kept me from understanding myself and like accepting myself for a long time. And I think that's very sad and not useful. I mean, it's useful for evil, but I don't think it's very useful for good. And so at the same time, you heard similar things in terms of like hell being a literal place that you were threatened with, but it didn't like when I divorced my husband, I also broke with the church and I spent years like lying in bed at night worried about my soul. Like if you tell me you're going to spend an eternity in literal physical torment, that seems like an important thing for me to figure out. Like
But
that seems like a high stakes question.
I think that, so the thing is that by the time I also left a husband and left a church at the same time, and I knew they were going to be tied together, but I was lots older. And I had spent a lot more time examining that and going through that. Oh my gosh, what if this is true? And what if, you know, all that through my head, and probably that delayed at least by a few years getting divorced and leaving the church. But I mean, as a kid and then as a young woman, I think I really believed that I was never good enough. I could never be good enough. And that anything that wasn't right was because I wasn't good enough, or I wasn't praying or reading the scriptures, or that, making out with a boyfriend in high school, whatever that was the reason these things were happening. So I think I did when I was young, like, struggle with that, and worry about an eternal damnation, you know. Um, and that while, and that's why a lot of people, or most people, have gotten away from calling these organizations cults and calling them high demand religions or whatever, is because cult creates an image that is like, mass murder suicide, you know. And so we have to have some distance from that, but it's controlling nonetheless, and has led lots of us to, wow, we might look back and say, well, that wasn't a horrible decision. It wasn't terrible to have been, married or have children or whatever, um, or even, pay tithing to a church. It still was done because by nature the organization is coercive. Because if you don't get this reward, or you're going to be punished eternally if you don't do X, Y, and Z, that's coercion.
Right. It's a threat.
Yeah. And if you're taught that, yes, we all have agency, we all have free will, but God's never going to lead you to do the sin or that sin or whatever, then do you really have free agency and free will? I don't see how you can. Yeah. Because most of us are gonna, I did this Stephen Covey 7 Habits. I used to teach that course for the Army, and one of the guys said, "Well, I don't have I don't have free will. I can't just decide to do what I want." Because he was in the Army, and he said I would end up going to, if I went AWOL, I'd end up going to, some army prison I can't recall the name of right now. But I said, but you do. You just don't want to live with the consequences of that. So I guess, and that if you define it that way, you do have free will. But that's a lot, that's a lot to be willing to risk just to do whatever they think is a sin. So I don't really think you, in that environment, have a choice. Obviously, we do have free will in real life because we did make choices, and we don't believe that we're going to, spend eternity in hell. Someone who signed up for sex and technology is, I don't know, they might not be thrilled about this conversation. We did say cult in the post, though, didn't we?
Maybe. In which post?
Oh, when we were talking about your Facebook post when you talked about
Oh.
tonight's
Oh, yeah.
live. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the extent to which any of us has free will or agency. It's hard to know, but I do think that it's definitely a spectrum, and like there's a big difference between, if you do this, I'm going to be disappointed, and if you do this, you're going to go to prison.
Yeah.
um And there's a big difference between, like, if you do this, God is gonna be disappointed, which is a big deal, I think, if you the way I was taught about God. And if you do this, God is gonna send you to spend an eternity in torment. And it's like, okay, if you're gonna say that, you probably should have some, like, really strong evidence that it's true, or reason to believe that it's true. It doesn't exist. And if you don't, then maybe don't. You're empowering whoever's saying it, because the person saying it is often usually saying and a bunch of other things about God and like what God thinks and what God wants and so on and so forth. And so it's a lot of power to give any person to say like, I know what will help you avoid eternal physical torment. Um, and as it turns out, a lot of those people could not be trusted with that power,
Mm.
shockingly. So yeah, I mean, to me, I don't have any sometimes I called it a rape cult. I called evangelical Christianity a rape cult, but that was kind of a clickbaity shorthand way to describe it. But at the end of the day, it's just like some amount of coercion is unavoidable. That's just, if you don't pay your taxes, you go to jail. I can't think of a better way to do things. But um, but threatening little children with eternal torment is not necessary. We don't have to do
Yeah.
things that way. A lot of churches don't. And like
Yeah.
I think that we should stop doing that.
Yeah, that's nightmares territory,
Literal,
right?
like,
I mean that literally. I do mean that
yeah,
literally. You had nightmares. I used to have nightmares about flies and the plagues. I mean, literally. And I can't have a fly in my house as a result of that because it's just so, I mean, it was terrifying.
considering. Yeah, I mean, I would stay up at night and pray for my grandparents because I wasn't sure that they weren't going to die and go to hell. And that's just like not a thing a kid should have to worry about.
No, definitely not.
Oh, it is just a big religion
Oh,
slur for the little religion. The distinction is the big one has other denominations you can jump to. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about Christianity lately. There's this pastor on TikTok I really like, and um, I've been thinking about like how to deprogram people from a cult, and one of the effective ways is to like find common ground. And so it's scary to me still. Like I still feel a lot of emotion around Christianity and the Bible.
it's interesting that you said that you have a pastor you like to watch. Like I just keep on scrolling, man. I'm not interested in anybody who's preaching anything, even if they're nice about it. Inclusive, nothing. Let's just let's go.
That's how I was for many, many years until very recently. I think it's really been during Trump. I I think the first thing I remember reading was Jesus and John Wayne, and that was
Mm.
very historical, and so I could tolerate that. And then I've read The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory. I thought that was really interesting. It was a lot of history, but it was also a lot of contemporary. I'm really inspired by the people who are trying to make Christianity less shitty in a way that I wasn't like 5
Mm.
years ago, where I was like, "Why this is not a good situation, like, why are you trying to make something, like, so that's been so harmful to me and so many people, like, trying to make it less harmful, like, why?" But I feel much more I don't know, there's, like, a harm reduction aspect to it where it's like, "Well, people are gonna do it, so maybe
Mm.
help them do it a little less shittily." Um, and I think, like, there's a big meaning deficit in this country, and religion is how people tend to find that community and meaning and, good, bad, or indifferent. It's like, maybe it's easier to get people to do a less harmful version of what they're already doing than to try to create and then sell a new way to do it,
But see,
if that
that's
makes
what
sense.
I didn't ever get. So leaving the church and when I would talk to people, so I would tell my friend, in my 20s when I was still active in the Mormon church, I'd say, if I'm walking down the street and Jesus is going to be the son of God, I'm not buying it. If Joseph Smith is up there in upstate New York, saying he saw God, I'm not buying it. They said, "Well, but it's true." And I said, "Well, you're not buying," and I, mentioned these other leaders of churches and cults or whatever. And so for me, there there the harm reduction thing is, I guess it's okay, but my view is people would say, "Well, if you don't believe in God, then why do good things?" I said, "Because I'm a human." I mean, so I don't need to find meaning in that way. I miss community, and we've talked about that, but in terms of finding meaning in my life, meaning in my life is just connecting with people and being a good human. And it's hard. You can't disconnect, obviously. You can't disconnect a belief or teaching that you've been exposed to in your life, um, to how that influences how I get up and feel about other humans every day. I think the biggest example I have that is my husband. He actually was a-religious, and I know this is going to be hard for everyone who like walks in the United States of America, but he did not know till he was, like, in junior high, probably, that what Easter and Christmas, the religious significance of Easter and Christmas, he swears we just had this conversation within the last week. He swears he had no idea that Christmas was Santa and presents and Easter was candy and the Easter bunny. And I was like, "Didn't you ever walk by a manger scene and someone ask someone and say, "What was that baby in the basket doing?" I No, it seems completely incredible, but he swear so he he still gets up and, he is a non-believer, never been a believer, didn't even really know about it. But he still gets up and tries to be a good human to other people, so I don't know.
That's wild. I I grew up in Huntsville, and then I moved to Birmingham, and then I met a guy who I would say Bible verses, like, just as, like, cruelty for swine, just as, like, part of aphorisms or what a part of the conversation,
Mhm.
and he would not know the reference, like, he would have
Yeah.
never heard it, but he was born in, like, St. Petersburg and grew up in Brighton Beach, so they weren't reading certainly the New Testament.
But
Uh,
it is interesting because, I have found this same thing with my husband. He was born in Philadelphia, he lived overseas, parents not religious, but just the basic cultural references that we have, like, I don't know him from Adam. I had to
yeah,
explain who Adam was,
that's wild. That is wild.
and we have so many biblical cultural expressions.
I mean, for me, like, I had to go through a time of, like, wait, what's
Totally, yeah. The manger, it's just like Easter Bunny and Santa.
just the Jesus part of it seriously.
Yeah.
Well, I
Some
think a
people
lot of the
take it
people in
very
church
seriously.
don't. I think that's really interesting. So when you look at, like, how education and income correlate to religiosity, income and education correlate positively with church attendance and negatively with religious faith.
So you're going to church if you have more education and more income, but you don't believe the bullshit they're serving.
That's correct.
Huh,
On average, yes, in America.
that's wild.
Um,
Like, why bother to go?
because there's, like, not anything else to do in most of America. Like, church is where you have civil society. It's like church, immigrant groups, and PTA. This is one of the main findings of Alienated America, where Tim Carney went into the counties that went for Trump versus the counties that went for a different Republican in the primary leading up to
Mhm.
2016. And yeah, he found that in most of America, the bowling leagues and Kiwanis and all that's been hollowed out. Like, it's not, nobody's
Mhm.
running it. And so if you want to be part of civil society, it's like PTA church and immigrant communities are like the way that they're the institutions available to you. And when I moved back to Huntsville, I would meet people. I think like I remember talking to somebody I'd like match with on a dating app, and I would say, how do I meet other adults? Like, how do I meet people? And they would say, go to church, go to church. It's like what you do. It's, separate from faith. Yeah. So I think like for me, when I left the church, I had to go through like a, a time of like nihilism and then building my own sources of meaning. And that was hard and sucked. And I've been saying for a long time, like, I just think that like nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to be bothered with that. And I don't blame them. It sucks. Like people want to be handed like, this is the meaning of life. This is, and other people don't have to take it all or nothing. They don't have to take it to the extreme. They're not up at night wondering if every part of it is true and where they're going to spend an eternity. Like they're just kind of like whatever about it, and must be nice. But so I do think that like church is giving people something that we like. There's not really another.
Substitution or a replacement for it.
No, no, not that I've seen. And I've thought a lot about it.
Jillian, I'm interested to know. So when my kids asked me if Santa was real, I always told them the truth. I didn't mind them. I don't remember that asking me if Jesus was real, actually. Um, so that brings up an interesting question. Like if they had said, "Is Jesus real?" What I would have said. I don't know. None of them believe now, so it's I didn't have to face that. But I do remember almost, I think all of them when they asked me about Santa, and I told them the truth, which I never, my ex-husband was big on Christmas, and he just wanted to keep that Santa story alive, but I wasn't gonna lie, so.
Both of my parents were like, we're Santa, Santa's fake, um, from a very young age.
Oh, really?
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know what the oh, I
Jesus is a
yeah.
real historical figure.
Yes,
Jesus
yes.
did live. Um, it's funny. We have a joke that when mom would ask me a question, I would just guess Jesus because it was so often the right answer.
That's
Jesus?
funny. That's really funny. Yeah, I was, but so I another question about this Santa is, most people who celebrate Christmas don't do it religiously? Do you know? I'm just curious because you know lots of these kinds of facts.
I have no idea. I don't know.
I
I would
mean,
imagine like some would.
we did.
Yeah,
And
we
so,
definitely.
and my kid well, all my kids, but one of my children who doesn't believe at all, she like won't even celebrate Christmas anymore um, because she doesn't believe, which too bad for her kid, but
No, why Santa has to be excluded from the situation.
I mean, I think Santa is just a cultural
Yeah,
Christmas, the way we celebrate in the United States with Santa is just a cultural thing. It's not
right.
religious anymore. Same with the
Not
Easter Bunny. Who
necessarily.
cares that it started religiously? I guess.
I don't know. Every year they're like, we can't even. They're taking Christmas from us. Jesus is the reason for the season.
Oh, oh, nice, Julian. So
Tried to
basically,
sell.
yeah, you gave gifts to each other, and it was a nice holiday and food
Yeah.
and gifts. And I've just pretty much given up because it's such hard work.
That was my mom. She was like, I'm so glad that your grandparents and your dad do a Christmas because I'm exhausted. I'm like, if I were a mom, I would be in the same boat. It seems like a lot.
Oh, I
Maybe your
was like,
daughter is just using her atheism as an excuse to not have to be bothered.
yeah, I was the I had 4 kids. Uh, then I got a 5th one. I only never had more than 4 in the house at a time. I worked full time, and I was like, kids could open their presents at 7, they could come out, and at 6:45, I'm still wrapping the heavy things, right? So, yeah, I don't miss that at all.
No, that's a lot. But I'm sure, like, church provides childcare, it provides vacation Bible school, it provides a lot of just like practical things as well
Mhm.
that I think are like really useful. And like I said, like I just don't know of another institution that's like quite providing the same things. And so maybe it's a easier lift really to just kind of try to make that a little better than to say, like, we're gonna build some other institution from scratch to try to do a
Yeah.
lot of the same things.
Well, and we talked about that missing the community part. That's so easy about the Mormon church because I've moved around a lot. You just show up somewhere, you got an address, you go over to, you know, you go over to the church and it's built in. I was able to, for good or bad, I've thought about this more recently, but I could get babysitters right away because I often would move somewhere and have a job, right? And then I need someone to take care of my kids and that's a whole nother thing about that whole trust and how that can make people susceptible to victimization. But yeah, it was an easy way to get connected into a new town community, have friends right away because as you discovered when you moved to Huntsville, it's hard to make friends. We were just talking about that. It's hard to make friends when you don't when you're not in school anymore and you have a job that is individual and isolating.
Totally.
Yeah.
Gives you something to bond over and some kind of like social obligation to be nice and include people who show up and
Hmm.
there's a lot of good about it for sure.
All right. We've petered out. Does anybody have any questions?
We never get
We'll
any
answer
questions.
anything.
We
Anything.
it's just, we cover everything, I guess.
I don't
We'll
know.
be
The
at it next
regulars,
week.
yeah. I was going to say the regulars already know how many sexual partners I've had in my life.
Well, it's not a long list.
No, well, I was just saying that, teasing like that, so that people who haven't heard that might ask a question. Or it's
How
teasing for
many?
next time. Let's see. Um, yeah, I don't know.
Take bets. Give a prize to whoever gets closest.
Oh, that's funny.
I couldn't tell you. I'm lying.
It's all right. It's a it's a weird statistic actually for people to count.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
It's
And
a
what
very
count?
weird thing. Oh yeah, that's true. Everybody's definition is a little bit different about what counts.
Mhm. Mhm. So you go the Clinton route or,
Yeah, that I hadn't thought about that. I'll have to say, and maybe this is a topic for another day, but I'll throw it out there. I have all these adult children and I'm pretty open, but I don't talk to them about that. I mean, it's really and I was thinking about that actually the other day after one of our talks. I was like, wow, I really fell down on the job on that. Like I wasn't open enough. I was sort of like, okay, do you need birth control? We can get birth control. It's like that kind of mom, not really the talking about it or like I have no idea I have 5 adult children and not young adults. I mean, 34 to 44, right? So they've lived, and I have no idea. I wouldn't even know. I mean, never talked about it. They've never talked about it. And which is so funny because I'm an open person. I talk all the time. You and I talk for hours. We'll have trouble getting out of the car, ending our conversations, but yet with my own kids, and I'm close to them. I talk to all of them at least 3 or 4 times a week. It's so weird. I've gotta figure that. Good, why would you? Julian, you don't want your mom calling you up and asking you about your sexual partners, I guess, huh? Okay. That's good advice, thank you.
I mean, if they had tried and you had not been willing, I think that would be a problem, but I don't know, they seem to have gotten through pretty unscathed. I think it's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. So maybe that's right. If they wanted to talk about it and I shut it down. But yeah, I think you're right, Julian. It would be weird if I called them up right now and said, "Hey, been thinking about this."
I think if you just don't, like, give them a lot of shame and fear, like, you're doing better than 99% of American parents, and I think that's fantastic, and that's, you know,
Well, thanks.
I
But
think that's great.
I do have like because they all were were grown up. I mean, not my stepdaughter, but the other 4 in the Mormon church. And I didn't wasn't an abstinence only preacher. I was more like, okay, if you decide to do this, of course, birth control, but also we talked about just making a decision that they want to make, not to feel pressured, not to, you know, and that I didn't expect that they would not have sex till they were married. I thought that was ridiculous. And in fact, I told them that this is a really big part of your life. I wouldn't recommend getting married as a virgin. Do not recommend because it's such an important part of your life. And if you don't know if you're sexually compatible and then you enter into this legal commitment or religious commitment, it could really fuck you up. I didn't use that word, but um because back then I wasn't using that word very much, but I wanted them to know that it was okay to decide that even if you were going to a Mormon church every week and someone else was telling you differently, but just that it should be a thoughtful decision in my view. It's and that's what I told them, that it's something that you should think about. And I know that I'm like prudish in this way or sentimental or whatever, but I felt like, okay, that's a level of intimacy that you need to think about probably before you enter into it, especially as a young person. Right.
You killed it. That's incredible. That sounds like A+ parenting. I
Thank
love
you.
it. Yeah, I think that's great. I'll tell you what, I do not regret that my husband was my first, you know, really
Mm,
sexual partner. I think getting married at 22 was a choice. But I don't feel like I missed out on a lot of hot, great sex between the ages of whatever and 22. I what I dislike is why I did it. That I thought that
mhm.
there was like a moral reason that God would be upset or
Yeah.
whatever. And it's like, no, it's just that like your brain isn't formed and their brains aren't formed, and there's it's the highest risk and probably the lowest reward when you're young. So
Yeah.
maybe wait a second. Nothing wrong with that. But sounds like you knocked it out of the park. And
Well, no one came crying and sobbed all night when I don't know when it would have been or when their first experience was, but I didn't have anyone do that, so that's good. Yeah.
love it. Love it.
And here we are at 9 o'clock. Thank you again, Kathy, for
Thank you.
and all the people who've joined. I'm like so impressed that so many people want to listen to us go on and on for a couple hours. I really appreciate it.
Really appreciate it. Thank you for spending time with us. Thank you for spending time with me, Gwen. Thank you for doing it every week. We'll be back this coming Wednesday. Might have a guest, might not. We'll find
We'll
out.
see.
Right.
Yeah, well, so, yes, that is a good point, Julian.
Brag, brag, brag.
Talk to you later. Bye.